My new neighbor thought she had discovered the perfect plan to wipe out 4 generations of my family's legacy using her so-called green weapon. But I found its one fatal flaw and slowly turned her twisted gift against her until she lost everything she once used to threaten us. I found my award-winning heritage tomatoes severed from their stalks, and my hands trembled as I felt the precise incisions, not ragged like an animal's work, but cleanly cut with pruning shears taken from my late grandmother's plot. I had taken ownership of this residence half a year prior, following her passing, sacrificing a career advancement to relocate here from out of state, determined not to let her heritage vanish. These were more than just flora. That rose bush originated from her bridal arrangement 5 decades ago. Those tomato seeds had been preserved through 4 lineages. The herb patch provided for every Sunday meal I could recall. I had even positioned a commemorative marker near her cherished seat, where she would often converse softly with her greenery. I continued this ritual, too, donning her aged gardening gloves, imbued with the scent of her hand cream. My nursing night shifts meant I cultivated the garden at sunrise, finding it a source of calm and a way to navigate sorrow. The sole recent addition to our street was Susan, who had recently wed Robert, our next-door neighbor. Robert had resided there perpetually and served as the homeowners association president, yet appeared quite amiable during our few conversations. I had not yet encountered his new spouse. From my kitchen pane, I observed a female figure on their veranda, speaking on her mobile device and gesturing towards my cultivated space. 2 mornings later, I discovered her caught in the act, a basket brimming with my produce. She offered a smile and stated she was assisting with the harvest, as the garden seemed overwhelming for one individual. She asserted Robert had informed her it was a communal area for the entire street. My grandmother had been generous, but this felt improper. I suppressed my irritation and offered to instruct her on cultivating her own garden, even presenting her with one of my heirloom tomato saplings in one of my grandmother's hand-decorated containers. She cooed about my kindness while making remarks about the untidy abundance. The subsequent morning, as I was irrigating, the refuse collection vehicle rumbled down our thoroughfare. I watched in dismay as my gifted plant, still in grandmother's ceramic vessel, was flung from Susan's receptacle into the truck. The container fractured in the compactor. That intentional disrespect transformed my hurt into fury. My surveillance camera began capturing her removing vegetables each dawn while I was at work. She complained to neighbors that my garden attracted vermin. Robert was always conveniently absent at work during her activities. After 2 weeks of pilfering, I erected a modest barrier with a polite private garden inscription. I returned home to find it dismantled, with Susan alleging it was on her property. She had lodged a homeowners association grievance about my unsightly garden. Then I located my grandmother's memorial stone concealed behind the shed. During our confrontation, she inadvertently revealed something that clarified everything. She mentioned Robert incessantly praised my grandmother's impeccable garden when they were courting. She perceived my garden as a rival for his admiration, yet I had witnessed her hosting garden gatherings, claiming credit for cultivating everything herself. She despised what it represented but desired the prestige it conferred. The HOA infractions continued, clearly influenced by Susan's intimate conversations with Robert. Neighbors began avoiding me, unwilling to antagonize the HOA president's spouse. I investigated property boundaries and located the old survey markers, confirming the garden was mine. I documented every detail and installed additional cameras. When I captured her on video salting the ground near grandmother's rose bush, I confronted her with the proof and threatened to contact law enforcement. She apologized with feigned tears and pledged to cease. 2 weeks of tranquility passed, and I began to relax. My companions persuaded me I required a holiday after all the strain. I hesitated to abandon the garden, but neighbors promised to water everything, and Susan had been completely avoiding me, remaining indoors whenever I was outside. Perhaps she had finally learned her lesson. I spent 2 weeks at the seaside, posting cheerful photographs and at last feeling human again. The saline air and distance provided me with perspective. I returned home, sun-kissed and invigorated, prepared to embrace my grandmother's garden with renewed vigor. But something felt amiss as I walked up the pathway. Peculiar shoots emerged along our shared boundary line. My heart sank as I recognized the distinct segmented stalks. Bamboo, running bamboo specifically, the most aggressive variety one could legally cultivate. In just 2 weeks, it had already grown 3 feet tall, and the subterranean runners were heading directly for my garden. That sorceress had waited until my departure to enact her retribution. I stood there, gazing at the bamboo thicket she had initiated, knowing it could devastate everything within months. The roots would constrict my grandmother's roses and fracture the foundation of her greenhouse. This was no longer mere petty theft. This was botanical conflict. I retrieved my phone and began searching for the most vigorous plants permissible to grow, because if she intended to engage in dirty tactics, I was finished being the amiable individual with a deceased grandmother's garden. I spent that entire night researching bamboo eradication techniques. The more I read, the worse it became. Running bamboo could extend 30 feet underground in a single season. The roots descended 6 feet. Once established, it was nearly impossible to eliminate. I would need to excavate trenches 3 feet deep around my entire garden. Even then, any root fragment left behind would regenerate. I could not sleep, contemplating those runners advancing towards my tomatoes. The next morning, I seized a spade and commenced digging. My back protested after 2 hours, but I had only progressed 10 feet. Jennifer observed from her window, sipping coffee. She waved cheerfully when she noticed me looking. I wished to hurl the shovel at her complacent countenance. Instead, I continued excavating until my hands were raw with abrasions. The morning sun ascended higher, and perspiration dripped into my eyes, but I could not desist. Every shovelful of earth felt like a minor triumph against her encroachment. I contacted a landscape professional for an estimate on bamboo barriers. He chuckled when he assessed the situation, informing me it would cost $8,000 at minimum. He stated I should have acted sooner. The bamboo had already spread beneath the fence. He indicated new shoots emerging in my herb garden. My stomach churned. $8,000 was more than I possessed in savings after covering Grandma's funeral and relocation expenses. That is when I recalled something Grandma frequently lamented about the previous occupants of Jennifer's dwelling. They had installed an elaborate septic system after their old one failed. She mentioned they boasted about the costly French drain system that ran along our property line, claiming it cost them $20,000 back in the 90s. She had always rolled her eyes when recounting that tale, remarking some individuals possessed more money than sense. I wondered if Jennifer was aware of it. I spent the following week in a desperate struggle. Every morning before work, I would discover new bamboo shoots. I would cut them down, and they would re-emerge overnight. The roots were propagating faster than I could excavate. My beautiful garden began to resemble a war zone. Trenches everywhere, mounds of soil, dying plants where I had inadvertently severed their roots while digging. The lavender that Grandma had planted for my 10th birthday was wilting, and I nearly wept when I had to remove her prized basil plants to dig another defensive trench. Dennis finally approached me one evening. He appeared genuinely perplexed about the bamboo situation, inquiring why I had permitted it to escalate so severely. I informed him Jennifer had planted it while I was on vacation. His face paled. He mumbled something about verifying with her and hastened indoors. I overheard them disputing through the open windows. Phrases like property values and what were you thinking drifted across the fence. The bamboo continued to proliferate. Within a month, it had overtaken a quarter of my garden. My heirloom tomatoes were struggling. The rose bush appeared ailing. I attempted every natural remedy I could locate. Vinegar, boiling water, salt. Nothing proved effective. The bamboo simply persisted. Each failed endeavor felt like losing another fragment of Grandma. I began to observe something intriguing, however. The bamboo seemed to flourish more rapidly along the fence line. The shoots there were thicker, healthier. I remembered the landscaper mentioning that bamboo favored moisture. That French drain system must be providing ideal conditions. An idea began to form. If I could not strike the bamboo, perhaps I could guide it instead. Instead of combating the bamboo everywhere, I concentrated on one objective. I constructed barriers, directing it away from my garden beds, utilizing metal sheeting, concrete blocks, anything I could procure. But I left the fence line entirely open, even commencing to water that area excessively. The bamboo followed the path of least resistance, pursuing the water like a river follows its course. Jennifer noticed my altered tactics. She would smirk whenever she observed me watering near the fence, likely assuming I had surrendered. She began hosting more garden gatherings, still claiming credit for vegetables she had pilfered from me months ago. Her guests would commend her green thumb while I toiled in the trenches next door. I overheard her confiding in someone that she was considering entering the county fair with her tomatoes. The bamboo grew wildly along the property line, now 15 feet tall, dense as a jungle. Jennifer seemed content with her verdant wall, obscuring my unattractive garden from view. She had no inkling of what was transpiring beneath the surface. Those runners were pursuing the moisture, spreading deeply and broadly, precisely where her septic system lay. Nature possesses its own form of retribution, and I was merely facilitating it. I maintained meticulous records and captured photographs daily, documenting every new shoot, every inch of expansion. The bamboo was performing precisely as I had hoped, following the French drains, sending runners deep into her property. The system that cost $20,000 was about to become exceedingly costly lawn art. My grandmother would have appreciated the poetic justice of it all. 3 months after the bamboo emerged, I noticed Jennifer's yard appearing saturated. Just a small damp patch at first, near the fence. She had landscapers there adding soil, enhancing drainage. They had no idea what was truly occurring underground. The bamboo roots were already entwined around those pipes like serpents. Soon enough, those roots would locate every weak point, every joint, every minuscule fissure in that expensive system, and when they did, Jennifer would discover that some gardens retaliate. I continued to irrigate that fence line diligently, every morning before my hospital shift, every evening upon my return home, sometimes even venturing out with a torch if I had worked a double. The bamboo thrived, sprouting faster than I had ever witnessed plants grow. Within weeks, what had been sparse shoots became a dense wall of green. Jennifer began complaining to Dennis about the jungle between our properties. I heard her piercing voice through my kitchen window one Saturday morning, declaring it made their yard feel confined, like residing in a confinement. Dennis, ever the conciliator, suggested she prune it back to a reasonable height. She asserted that was my responsibility since it was growing on my side of the property line. He reminded her, with barely concealed exasperation, that she had planted it herself. That silenced her quite swiftly. I smiled into my coffee cup, recalling how smug she had appeared that day, planting what she believed would be her clandestine weapon against my garden. The damp area in her yard expanded each week, spreading like an oil stain across her immaculate lawn. She had various landscaping firms out every few days, a procession of vehicles and bewildered professionals. They would traverse the property with furrowed brows, scratch their heads, excavate test holes, add more drainage pipes, install French drains, and charge her hundreds of dollars for each unsuccessful attempt. The spot would dry up for a few days, offering her false hope, then return worse than before. I observed from my kitchen window as they introduced specialized equipment, moisture meters, and ground-penetrating radar. They were nearing the discovery of the actual issue, but not quite there yet. One younger landscaper kept gazing at the bamboo in the wet areas, clearly making connections, but Jennifer would divert his attention elsewhere whenever he became too inquisitive. My garden began to recuperate once I managed the bamboo on my side. The tomatoes rebounded first, their foliage returning to a deep green instead of the sickly yellow they had been. The roses blossomed again, more vibrant than ever, as if celebrating their liberation. I even managed to salvage most of the herb garden that Jennifer had plundered, coaxing the basil and oregano back to life with meticulous pruning and fertilizer. I started posting photographs on social media of my harvest, ensuring to capture the morning dew on the heirloom tomatoes, the perfect coil of the climbing beans. I made certain to tag the location so neighbors could witness the abundance flourishing in what Jennifer had labeled an eyesore. Her friends began inquiring at their weekly wine gatherings why her garden was not producing like mine. She informed them she was concentrating on landscaping this year, not vegetables, that food gardens were rather unrefined anyway. One misty morning, I found her in my garden again, not pilfering this time, just standing there among my tomato plants, staring at them with an expression I could not quite decipher. She was clad in her silk pajamas and designer garden clogs, appearing utterly out of place amidst the honest soil and burgeoning life. She startled when she saw me, nearly toppling a stake, claiming she was searching for her feline, Mr. Whiskers. She did not possess a cat, never had in all the years they had resided there. I instructed her to depart immediately. She claimed I was being unreasonable, that neighbors should share their bounty, that it was the charitable thing to do. I reminded her about the bamboo thicket she planted, about finding her stealing my vegetables, about the HOA complaints. She asserted the bamboo was a present to create seclusion, that we would both benefit from it. We both knew she was fabricating, but she maintained eye contact, that practiced sincerity that likely worked on Dennis but had never deceived me. The soggy patch in her yard transformed into a proper quagmire within a month. The grass perished completely, leaving exposed mud that squelched when one walked nearby. One could detect an unpleasant odor, especially on warm days, not quite sewage, but definitely not right, like stagnant water mixed with something chemical. She had a pool gathering scheduled for the subsequent weekend, having boasted about it for months, their annual summer assembly where she showcased her flawless home to all their country club acquaintances. She spent the entire week in a frenzy attempting to rectify the yard. Trucks delivered sand by the ton, gravel, even brought in costly sod from a specialized company. She personally supervised the laborers, barking directives, demanding they work faster. Nothing succeeded. The ground simply absorbed everything like a ravenous maw, the new sod sinking into the mire within hours. I resolved to be helpful, or at least appear to be. I knocked on their door on a Thursday evening with a platter of cookies made with my garden herbs, rosemary shortbread, my grandmother's recipe. Jennifer answered, looking more stressed than I had ever seen her, with dark circles beneath her eyes and her usually immaculate hair disheveled. I casually mentioned I had observed their yard difficulties, that it must be so exasperating with the party approaching. I offered to recommend the landscaper who had assisted me with the bamboo situation. She practically pleaded for his contact information, her pride crumbling in the face of desperation. I provided it to her with my sweetest smile. He was the same individual who had informed me about bamboo's affinity for moisture, how its roots seek out water sources with devastating efficacy. He'll diagnose the problem quite quickly, I assured her. The landscaper, Larry Martinez, arrived 2 days later. I watched from my garden as he traversed the property with Jennifer and Dennis, his expression growing increasingly grave by the minute. He kept indicating the bamboo thicket, then the damp areas, then back at the bamboo. He knelt at one point, digging into the muck with his bare hands, extracting what appeared to be white filaments, bamboo roots. Dennis's face became redder and redder as Larry elucidated what was transpiring. Jennifer kept shaking her head violently, insisting it could not be the bamboo, that bamboo was merely a grass, innocuous. Larry produced his tablet, displaying photographs of similar damage he had witnessed. The landscaper departed after an hour of heated discussion. They did not appear pleased. That evening, I heard them arguing again through their open windows. Dennis's voice carried clearly through the summer air, something about $20,000 minimum and insurance not covering self-inflicted damage. Jennifer's voice escalated to a shriek, insisting it was not self-inflicted, that she had been sabotaged. Jennifer's pool party proceeded nonetheless. She had concealed the worst areas with painted plywood and strategic embellishments, potted plants, outdoor rugs, even a few garden statues positioned to obstruct a view. She informed guests they were undergoing renovations, planning a Japanese garden. Halfway through the party, just as Jennifer was holding court about her landscape plans, one of the boards fractured. A guest designer heel went directly through into the mire below. The odor that arose, putrid eggs mixed with sewage, cleared the patio in seconds. People seized their beverages and fled to the front yard. The party concluded quite swiftly after that, guests fabricating excuses about early mornings and forgotten appointments. I observed from my bedroom window as Jennifer stood alone on her patio, surveying the catastrophe, her flawless party in ruins. Monday morning brought septic vehicles, large ones with heavy-duty pumps and tanks, the kind that evacuate entire systems, not just routine maintenance. They spent hours working while Jennifer paced the driveway, cell phone pressed to her ear, presumably disputing with insurance companies. I overheard the lead technician explaining in patient detail that bamboo roots had infiltrated the entire drainage system. The roots had crushed pipes like paper straws, blocked filters, completely destroyed the leach field. It would necessitate full replacement of the entire system. Insurance would not cover it since she had planted the bamboo herself. It was deemed negligent maintenance. The technician showed her photographs on his phone of the root mass they had extracted, white tendrils wrapped around every pipe like some subterranean monster. She attempted to accuse me, her voice rising to hysteria. She informed the septic company I had planted the bamboo to sabotage her property, that I had irrigated it deliberately to direct the roots towards her system. The technician looked at where the bamboo originated, clearly on her side of the fence, the original planting holes still visible. He shook his head and resumed work, unmoved by her tears. She stood there, sputtering about property lines and hostile neighbors, about lawsuits and damages. No one was listening. Even Dennis had gone inside, leaving her to rant alone in the driveway. The stench worsened over the next few days as the damaged system backed up completely. Raw sewage had been seeping into her yard for weeks, the technicians discovered. The health department appeared after multiple neighbors complained about the odor. They posted a bright orange notice on her door. The house was uninhabitable until the septic was repaired and the contaminated soil remediated. Jennifer and Dennis had to relocate to a hotel that afternoon. I observed them loading suitcases into their Mercedes. Dennis would not even look at Jennifer, his jaw clenched tightly. She kept attempting to converse with him, gesticulating wildly, but he simply loaded bags in silence. My cousin Michelle came to visit that weekend. She is a master horticulturist, teaches sustainable agriculture at the community college, writes for gardening periodicals. I showed her around Grandma's garden, recounted the entire narrative over iced tea on the porch. She laughed until she wept when she saw the bamboo thicket, declaring it the most elegant retribution she had ever witnessed. Nature's justice, she called it. We spent the afternoon harvesting vegetables and preparing salsa with Grandma's recipe, the one she had never transcribed but taught me by feel and taste. Michelle helped me preserve a dozen jars, and we discussed Grandma, the legacy of these plants, how gardens recall everything. The construction crews arrived Monday morning at 7 sharp. Colossal excavators that shook the ground, dump trucks lined up down the street, workers in hazmat suits. They had to demolish Jennifer's entire backyard to access the septic system. The bamboo had to be removed too, every last bit of it, or the problem would simply recur. I watched them dig down 6 feet, then 8, then 10, extracting massive root masses that resembled giant white arachnids. Some of those roots were as thick as my arm, twisted and gnarled from their subterranean struggle with the pipes. They filled truck after truck with contaminated soil, bamboo roots, and destroyed pipe sections. Jennifer appeared while they were digging, screeching to a halt in the driveway. She began yelling at the crew about being careful with her lawn, about preserving her Japanese maple, about the cost. The foreman, a patient man named George, showed her the bamboo roots wrapped around the crushed pipes like boa constrictors. He explained how this would continue to happen unless they removed every single root, how bamboo could regenerate from a piece the size of a fingernail. She turned to glare at me over the fence, where I was training my pole beans. I waved cheerfully and returned to pruning my roses, humming one of Grandma's favorite tunes. The project consumed 3 weeks. 3 weeks of diesel engines operating from dawn till dusk, 3 weeks of beeping trucks reversing every few minutes, and workers shouting instructions over the din. 3 weeks of Jennifer's beautiful yard being transformed into a lunar landscape of churned earth and gaping chasms. They had to bring in specialized equipment to sift the soil for root fragments, like archaeologists searching for pottery shards. Even tiny pieces could regrow into new bamboo thickets, George explained to anyone who would listen. The neighbors gathered each evening to observe the progress, shaking their heads at the devastation. Dennis began spending more time outdoors during the construction, despite the noise and dust. He would stand at the fence, watching them work, sometimes with a beverage, sometimes just staring. I could see him calculating the expense in his head, his face growing more haggard each day. Sometimes he would glance over at my flourishing garden with something akin to regret, perhaps remembering the vegetables I had shared with them when they first moved in, before Jennifer decided my garden was an affront to her aesthetic. One evening, he apologized for not believing me about Jennifer's conduct. He stated he should have paid more attention, should have known something was amiss when she became fixated on my garden. I informed him gardens possessed a way of revealing people's true character, that plants were candid in ways humans rarely were. He nodded sadly and returned to watching his savings vanish into the ground. The final invoice amounted to $32,000. I know because Jennifer shrieked the figure loudly enough for the entire street to hear, her voice cracking with fury. Insurance covered $0. The bamboo was considered an intentional planting that caused foreseeable damage. The adjuster had discovered similar instances online. Plus, they found out she had misrepresented on the claim forms about when it was planted, stating it had been there when they purchased the house. Dennis's face appeared ashen when he signed the check, his hand trembling slightly. Jennifer stormed inside, slamming the door so forcefully the windows rattled. My garden exploded with growth that summer. Without the bamboo depleting nutrients and water, everything thrived beyond my wildest expectations. The heritage tomatoes produced more than I had ever witnessed, heavy clusters of fruit bending the supports. I had so much produce I initiated a small stand at the end of my driveway. I constructed it myself with reclaimed timber, painted it sage green like Grandma's old potting shed. I placed an honor system cash box and bags of fresh vegetables sorted by type. Neighbors adored it, stopping by on their morning strolls or after work. Even people from other streets began visiting, word spreading about the quality of the heritage varieties. Jennifer detested that vegetable stand with a passion that bordered on obsession. She would complain to anyone who would listen about the traffic, perhaps 3 vehicles an hour, the eyesore it was. It was featured in the local paper's garden section, the injustice of it all. But what could she do? I had permits from the city. The HOA rules she attempted to use against me actually safeguarded agricultural use of property, a remnant from when this was all farmland. Dennis had to remind her of that when she desired to file another complaint, his voice weary and defeated. The irony was delightful. As my produce ripened, tomatoes were selling faster than I could pick them. One morning, I discovered a note in my cash box, folded around a bill. Your grandmother would be proud. The garden is beautiful. Sorry for everything. D. Inside was a $100 bill. I gazed over at their house through the morning mist. Dennis was seated on their porch with coffee, observing the sunrise alone. He nodded when he saw me, a small, sorrowful smile on his face. We never discussed it directly, but he began purchasing vegetables regularly after that, always leaving more money than necessary. Jennifer attempted one last desperate maneuver in September. She hired a legal professional, a sharp individual from downtown who specialized in property disputes. She claimed the bamboo had actually originated on my property, that I had trained it to grow towards her yard. She demanded I pay half the septic costs, plus damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress. The lawyer arrived to inspect the situation, pulling up in a vehicle that cost more than my annual earnings. I showed him my security footage from the week I was on vacation 2 years ago. Crystal clear video of Jennifer planting bamboo along the fence, time-stamped and dated. It even showed her tamping down the soil, watering the new plants. The lawyer watched it twice, took some notes, then informed her she had no case and departed. She screamed at him in the driveway, threatened to report him to the bar. He drove away without looking back. The new septic system functioned flawlessly, but their yard was ruined. Just dirt and sparse grass where lush lawn used to be, like a scar across the landscape. Jennifer hired landscapers to rectify it, but nothing grew well. It turned out the bamboo removal chemicals had poisoned the soil. It would take years to recover fully without expensive remediation. She had destroyed her own paradise attempting to destroy mine. Sometimes karma arrives in the form of invasive plants, I reflected, recalling Grandma's saying about reaping what you sow. I continued expanding my garden operation through the fall. I added a greenhouse, utilizing funds from the vegetable stand. Nothing elaborate, but sturdy and practical. I commenced year-round cultivation, extending the season for tomatoes and peppers, starting seeds in the dead of winter. The local farmers market invited me to have a booth after the market manager stopped by my stand. I dedicated it to my grandmother's memory. I displayed her photograph from the 1960s, her standing in this very garden. I put up photos of her throughout the decades. I shared narratives about the heritage plants and their journeys to this plot of land. People enjoyed learning the history behind their food, the continuity of seeds saved year after year. Jennifer and Dennis separated by fall. He relocated to an apartment downtown, a small place near his office. She remained in the house, but rarely ventured outside anymore. When she did emerge, she would scurry to her car, avoiding eye contact with everyone. The neighbors who had shunned me after Jennifer's complaints began to approach again, sheepishly at first, then with genuine warmth. It turned out they had never liked Jennifer, but were afraid of HOA retaliation. She had caused the previous board president to be removed over a dispute about fence heights. With Dennis gone from the board, that threat vanished like morning dew. Sarah from across the street became my gardening companion. She had lost her husband last year to cancer and needed something positive to focus on, something life-affirming. We worked together most mornings before the heat, sharing stories and preserving Grandma's techniques. She had known my grandmother years ago, remembered purchasing tomatoes from her. She helped me document all the heritage varieties, their histories, growing instructions, the stories behind each one. We even began a cookbook with recipes utilizing the garden produce, Sarah testing each recipe multiple times until they were perfect. Winter arrived, and Jennifer's house went on the market just before Thanksgiving. The realtor encountered difficulty selling it despite the desirable neighborhood. Potential buyers would inquire about the ruined backyard, the new septic system, why such extensive work was required on a relatively new house. Word had circulated throughout the neighborhood about the bamboo incident. These things always do in small communities. Property values matter in HOA communities, and everyone knew this house came with a challenging history and a damaged yard that would take years to restore. I felt sympathy for Dennis, though. He would stop by occasionally on Saturday mornings to buy vegetables and converse. He informed me he had inherited that house from his parents, had lived there 40 years before Jennifer. He had met his first wife in that backyard, married her under the oak tree that Jennifer had cut down, raised his children there, taught them to ride bicycles in the driveway. Now he had lost it all because he had married someone who could not tolerate seeing others content, who viewed any success but her own as a personal assault. He stated the costly lesson was worth learning before it was too late, before he wasted more years. He was seeing a therapist, he admitted, attempting to comprehend how he had been so oblivious. The house finally sold in spring after remaining vacant all winter, significantly below the asking price. The buyers knew about the soil contamination, the bamboo risk, the entire saga. Jennifer disappeared without bidding farewell to anyone, the moving truck arriving at dawn and departing before noon. The new owners were a young family with 3 children, the Guans. They inquired about the bamboo situation first thing, having heard rumors. I recounted the entire story over coffee and cookies. They laughed and stated they would adhere to normal plants, perhaps some raised beds for vegetables. We quickly became good friends. Their children loved assisting in my garden, learning about the plants, just as I had with Grandma. Their small hands were gentle with seedlings. I gave her some of Grandma's easiest seeds to begin with, showed her how to plant them just right. My farm stand required expansion by summer. The honor system was no longer effective with so much traffic. I hired Sarah to manage it 3 days a week while I concentrated on cultivation and instruction. She proved to possess a genuine talent for customer service, remembering everyone's names and preferences. She would reserve the finest tomatoes for pregnant women, claiming they required the nutrients most. She always had complimentary samples, cut-up recipes printed out, stories about each variety ready to share. One morning, I discovered a package on my doorstep with no return address. Inside was Grandma's missing garden journal, the one I had searched everywhere for after she passed. Every page was filled with her meticulous handwriting, planting dates, weather observations, seed-saving notes, spanning decades. The last entry was just a week before she passed. At the very back, tucked into the binding, was a note. Found this when packing. Thought you should have it. Jay. I sat on Grandma's bench and wept, clutching that journal, not sorrowful tears, just overwhelmed. Even Jennifer, in all her bitterness, had recognized this belonged with a garden. Perhaps she had kept it as leverage initially, or out of spite, but somewhere in her exile, she had decided to return it. I would never forgive her for the damage she had caused, but I was thankful to have Grandma's words back. The journal transformed everything. It contained varieties I thought were lost forever, techniques I had half remembered, stories about where each plant originated. One entry described how her mother had smuggled tomato seeds from Italy in the hem of her dress. Another detailed the rose cutting from her wedding bouquet, how she had rooted it in a potato. There were recipes I had never seen, remedies using garden herbs, moon planting schedules that actually worked. I started a blog to share the journal entries, transcribing them exactly as written. The response was incredible. People from all over shared their own family garden stories, sent seeds their grandparents had preserved, asked questions about techniques. It became this beautiful community of gardeners preserving heritage varieties. A university professor even utilized it in her ethnobotany course, demonstrating how immigrant communities preserve their cultures through seeds. The cookbook publisher loved the journal angle. We restructured the entire book around Grandma's entries, matching recipes to seasons, including her stories about each plant. The photography team spent a week at the garden, capturing it at dawn, in rain, under the harvest moon. They desired authentic shots, dirt under fingernails, imperfect vegetables, the genuine labor of cultivating food. The book sold 5,000 copies before it even printed. Fall brought the largest harvest I had ever witnessed. The expanded garden produced more than I could process alone. Sarah suggested we host a harvest festival, invite the entire neighborhood to pick vegetables for donation, make it a celebration of abundance rather than hoarding it all. We planned it for a Saturday in October, sent flyers to every house, posted on social media. I worried no one would come. Over 200 people appeared. Families with wagons, elderly individuals with baskets, teenagers dragged by their parents who ended up enjoying themselves. We picked everything ripe, sorted it into boxes for the food bank. Kids painted pumpkins while adults shared recipes. The Guans brought Vietnamese spring rolls made with my herbs. Someone else brought apple cider from their own trees. It felt like the neighborhood gatherings Grandma used to describe from her childhood. Andrew, the reporter, returned to cover the festival. This time, he brought a video crew, making a documentary about community gardens and food security. He interviewed dozens of people, all with stories about the garden, how it had brought neighbors together, taught kids where food came from, preserved cultural heritage. Dennis was there too, helping load boxes for the food bank. He looked healthier than I had seen him in years, laughing with other volunteers. We collected over 3,000 pounds of produce that day. The food bank director nearly wept when we delivered it all, stating it was the largest single donation they had ever received from a home garden. The vegetables would feed hundreds of families, all heritage varieties most people had never tasted. We made it an annual tradition after that, the harvest festival becoming as important as any holiday. Winter arrived early that year, but the greenhouse continued producing. I expanded the class schedule, adding workshops on preserving and canning. Sarah taught sessions on freezing and dehydrating. We processed hundreds of pounds of tomatoes into sauce, teaching people skills their grandparents took for granted. The greenhouse became a community hub during those cold months. Always someone stopping by to converse or learn or purchase vegetables for dinner. The cookbook launched in spring to amazing reviews. Food bloggers called it essential reading for heritage gardeners. The publisher arranged a book tour, but I only agreed to local events. I could not leave the garden during planting season. Instead, we hosted events at the farm, author readings in the greenhouse, cooking demonstrations using fresh ingredients. People drove from hours away to attend, buying signed books and seedlings to start their own heritage gardens. A film crew appeared in May, desiring to feature the garden in a documentary about sustainable agriculture. They had heard about the bamboo incident somehow, wanted to include it as an example of garden warfare. I declined to discuss Jennifer or any of that drama. I told them they could film the garden and the community programs, but the past was past. They spent 3 days filming anyway, interviewing customers and students and neighbors about what the garden meant to them. The summer solstice brought another milestone. The heritage tomato variety I had submitted to the seed exchange was officially accepted into their collection. They had grown test plots, verified its unique characteristics, documented its history from Grandma's journal. Now those seeds would be preserved forever, available to gardeners worldwide. Grandma's tomatoes had achieved immortality in the best possible way. My life had completely transformed in 3 years, from night shift nurse to full-time farmer, from grieving granddaughter to community educator. The garden supported me financially now, between the farm stand, classes, cookbook royalties, and speaking engagements. But more importantly, it connected me to hundreds of people who shared this passion for cultivating food and preserving heritage. Jennifer's house next door had become a blessing with the Guillen family. Their garden complemented mine, creating an entire block of food production. Other neighbors started gardens too, inspired by what they witnessed. The street that had once been perfect lawns and ornamental shrubs now burst with vegetables and fruit trees. Property values actually increased despite Jennifer's predictions. It turned out people desired to reside in neighborhoods that grew food. I hired 2 more employees that summer, both graduates from Michelle's Sustainable Agriculture program. The operation had grown beyond what I could manage alone. We added a second greenhouse, expanded the heritage seed collection, started a CSA program for weekly vegetable boxes. Every expansion honored Grandma's memory while serving the modern community's needs. One quiet morning in August, I was watering the tomatoes when I noticed movement by the fence. A small bamboo shoot had pushed through, probably from some deep-root fragment they had missed. I stared at it for a long moment, recalling everything that single plant represented. Then I carefully excavated it, ensuring to remove every bit of root. I dropped it in the burn barrel with the other garden waste. Some things did not deserve a second chance to take root. The local news picked up the story when our community garden program won a state award for food security innovation. They interviewed me in the greenhouse, surrounded by seedlings ready for the fall garden. I spoke about Grandma's vision, the importance of saving seeds, how one small garden could feed so many families. I kept it positive, focused on the future rather than dwelling on past conflicts. My phone rang constantly after that news segment. Other communities wanted to initiate similar programs. Schools wanted to bring classes. Publishers wanted more books. I declined most offers, keeping the focus local. This garden was about community, not fame, though I did agree to write a monthly column for a gardening magazine, sharing seasonal tips and heritage variety spotlights. The 3rd annual Harvest Festival attracted over 500 people. We had to borrow the church parking lot for overflow. Local restaurants set up booths featuring dishes made with heritage vegetables. The high school jazz band played while people picked produce. Kids ran through the garden paths, playing tag, their laughter mingling with music and conversation. It felt like Grandma's stories of barn raisings and community harvest come to life. Sarah and I were tidying up after the festival when she mentioned something she had heard. Jennifer had relocated back to the state, residing in a small apartment 2 towns over, working at a garden center of all places, selling plants to customers. Sarah had seen her there last week, almost did not recognize her. She said Jennifer looked different, humbler perhaps. She had inquired about me, how the garden was doing. Sarah informed her about the festival, the cookbook, all the success. Jennifer had just nodded and returned to watering the houseplants. I contemplated that information for days. Part of me wished to visit that garden center, see her working retail after all her pronouncements about being above such things. But what would be the purpose? She had learned her lesson the hard way, lost her marriage, her home, her savings, her reputation, all because she could not tolerate someone else succeeding. The bamboo had been her weapon and her downfall, poetic justice delivered by root and rhizome. Instead, I concentrated on the future, plans for a teaching kitchen next to the greenhouse, a scholarship program for low-income students to attend gardening classes, perhaps even a small farm store selling preserved goods year-round. Each idea felt like something Grandma would have cherished, ways to share the garden's bounty with more people. The heritage seeds would continue traveling, finding new gardens and new gardeners. The frost arrived late that year, extending the growing season into November. I covered the tender plants each night, uncovered them each morning, extracting every last tomato from the vines. The final harvest was bittersweet, knowing winter would quiet the garden, but the greenhouse would persist. The seeds would rest and await. The cycle would commence again in spring. Standing in the garden on the last warm day of fall, I reflected on everything that had transpired. How Jennifer's assault had actually strengthened the garden's position in the community. How her bamboo had led to a movement of neighborhood food production. How her jealousy had ultimately created more abundance than she had attempted to destroy. Sometimes the worst things that occur to us become the catalyst for our greatest growth. I picked the last perfect tomato of the season, still warm from the sun. I took a bite right there in the garden, juice running down my chin, tasting like summer and memories and home. This is what Jennifer had tried to steal, what she had never comprehended. It was not about the vegetables or the recognition or even the garden itself. It was about connection, continuity, community, things that cannot be destroyed by bamboo or bitterness or anything else. The garden would endure whatever came next. It had survived Jennifer. It would survive me too someday. Someone else would tend these plants, save these seeds, share this abundance. That is what heritage signifies, passing something precious to the next generation. I had learned that from Grandma, and now I was imparting it to others. The cycle continues.